We've begun, for the most part, though I've moved back and forth, spending time in the first book within the book, The Way of Illumination, which was a book that was assembled out of articles from a very early Sufi journal called Sufi, of which Hazrat Inayat Khan was the chief editor. And this journal existed from about 1915 to 1920. And so all of the pieces in The Way of Illumination come from that and answer many kind of basic sorts of Sufi questions. And so last week we dealt with initiation, but in it also are the 10 Sufi thoughts and various other things. And in this week we're going to look at the section on purpose, or life's purpose, and vocation, and what life in the world is about, according to Murshid. So he begins. Every soul at times asks itself, why am I here? This question arises in accordance with the development of one's intelligence. I like that, right from the beginning. That this is an intelligent question. And it's only after somebody has developed a bit that they begin to ask this question. And often after some trouble. The pain of the world brings on this question. What is my life's purpose? Why am I here? So he says this is an intelligent question. A person should ask this question. A person may say in answer, I'm here to eat, drink, and make merry, as people do. But this even the animals do. Therefore, what more has a person accomplished by being human? Another might affirm the attainment of power and position is important, but one must know that both of these are transitory. Power of any kind has its rise as well as its fall. All things we possess are taken from others, and others in their turn await with outstretched hands to seize them. So here we have the first of two answers. Eat, drink, and make merry. And he says that this is basically operated at the level of an animal who do all of these things. And not that we're critical of animals, but is it appropriate for us? Who have an animal side to us, but it's not all we are. The other answer, to attain power and position, while he breaks this down as transitory, I would say it's also still animal. The attainment of power and position. It's still an animal drive. I'm leader of the pack. I'm on top of the pile. In the political situation right now, we're being told that that's actually an attainment that qualifies one for leadership. I'm the strongest. I have the most. But it's basically animal. It's not operating at the level of the human yet. And it has the deficiency of being very transitory. You can achieve power and position, but you can't hold it. And in order to hold it at all, you have to take it from somebody else. And somebody else, still yet somebody else, is waiting in the wings to take it from you. Some say, we're here to gain honor. In this case, someone else has to be humbled in order to give the honor they seek. But they, in their turn, may have to be humbled by still a more ardent honor-seeking personality. So again, he's already doing the same turn as he did with power. You have to take power from somebody else, and somebody else is waiting to take it from you. And here, those who are seeking to be honored, he wants to point out that the one who's seeking such honor, there has to be somebody below them that looks up to them. And so even the desire for it is a way of desiring somebody else to be lower than you. So it's a faulty desire from the beginning. And even if you desire it, there's somebody that wants it more. And in order to get the honor that they want, you'll have to be humbled. So it's again transitory, power-based. We may then think that being loved is all important. But we should know that the beauty in ourselves, which makes another love us, is transient. It might be more appropriate to say being wanted. This may not be a good definition of love. Furthermore, the beauty we possess may pale in comparison with the beauty of another. When we seek the love of another, we are not only dependent upon their love, but are ourselves void of love. That's nicely said. So, this kind of desire to be wanted, it's a setup for disappointment. And if the desire is strong enough, it leaves us absent of love ourselves, because we're so focused on what we should get from it that there may be no actual love in it. If then we think it is desirable to love someone who deserves our love, so we turn it around, I'll love somebody that deserves my love, we are again mistaken. For we are always liable to be disappointed in the object of our love, who may perhaps never prove to be our ideal, the price of our love on examination. So, is it love if the basis of it is that they are deserving? Do we love people because they're deserving? Do we love our children because they're deserving? Do we love our parents because they're deserving? Or do we love them because we love them? That's conditional love. And Shakespeare's sonnet is coming to mind, but I can't quote it perfectly. Love is not love that alters when alteration finds, or removes with remover to be removed. Yes. No, it's an ever fixed point. So that's not love, that's conditional. So if we're disappointed in the object of our love, and they're no longer deserving, and the love goes with it, was it love? One is led to suppose and believe that virtue is the only thing that matters in life. But it will be found, you always know there's a but now, right? But it will be found that the greater number from among the patients of moral hallucination are to be met with among the self-righteous. Okay, so that deserves a little more analysis. One is led to suppose and believe that virtue is the only thing that matters in life. But we'll find that many of the people in our lives that suffer from a kind of moral hallucination are self-righteous. In all of these, there is a true and a false definition of the thing that's wanted. Love, the love as it's described here is not quite love, it's being wanted or wanting another. Here, calling virtue the thing that matters, it's not actually virtue. He's saying many of the people that say virtue is the most important thing and then think themselves virtuous are suffering from a kind of moral hallucination and self-righteousness. It's not actually virtue. So those who celebrate that as the most important thing and think that they're exemplars of it are most often merely self-righteous. Then the only purpose of our life here on earth, if there be any, and I think that's important, if there be any, is the successful attainment of life's demands. Life itself, to exist and to be in the midst of life itself. It may seem strange at first that all which life demands should be allowable and worthwhile attaining. So again, the only purpose of life here on earth, if there be any, is the successful attainment of life's demands, doing what life demands. What might that be? What does life demand? Shout them out. Cutting CO2. Right now, in the long term, or in not so long term, if we don't do this, there will not be life. That's a demand. What else? Sleep. What else?
Well, I don't know why this came to mind. I was thinking of mitzvot in a certain context.
What context do you think?
Well, in a Jewish observant context, and I think the reason that I thought of it was that in thinking about this main point, I was reminded of the old saying that the reward for performing a mitzvah is you get another one to perform. You don't get to, there isn't a redemption center where you cash in your chips.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. More? What does life demand? Growth. Life does demand growth. Showing up. Growth or showing up. You grow or you die. Things die back. Showing up, taking care of life's needs.
There's also a question here: which life are we talking about? There's the life of maybe, or which facet of life? There's nature. There's survival. There's divinity. So the different facets or levels may have corresponding demands or inspirations.
So there is nature, and then there's what seems to be a higher dimension of what is valuable in life. But is there really a distinction? Because it's not as if there's nature in us. We're merely an outgrowth of nature also, and so everything that is part of us and a necessary of life for us, including meeting emotional needs, is part of nature. And so he doesn't really make the distinction right away. Life, nature, it's all there, and meeting life's demands are meeting all of those demands. What is a valuable life? A meaningful life? The immediate needs as well as immediate emotional needs, spiritual needs, mental needs. And what does it take to meet those? Because he does say the successful attainment of life's demands. So the successful attainment has to be living life in a way that is on the edge of vitality in terms of, the four levels of our being. The material existence, the emotional existence, the cognitive existence, and the spiritual. I think it's all implicit here. But then he goes on to say, and it may seem strange at first sight that all which life demands should be allowable and worthwhile attaining. And this says something about that, in a sense, everything needs to happen. Uh, it's all allowable. And it's part of the diversity of being. It all needs to exist. What do we do with it and how we react to it is important. But he'll say later on in the section on constancy about it's all there. We have to accept it all, the beautiful and the ugly. We have to take it all in as part of this life. Accept it as all allowable. Maybe not all desirable, but all allowable in the diversity of being. But now he goes to the other point that we were making. But on a closer study of life, we see that the demands of our external self are the only ones we tend to know, and we're ignorant of the demands of the true self, our inner life. So when we ask about life's demands, we mostly think of food, warmth, shelter. But in the inner life, for instance, we know that we want good food and nice clothes, comfort of living and every convenience for moving about, honor, possessions, and all necessary means for the satisfaction of our vanity, all of which for the moment appear to us as our life's only demands. But neither they nor their joy remain with us constantly. We then come to think that what we had was but a little, and that perhaps more would satisfy us, and still more would suffice us in our need. But this is not so. Even if the whole universe were within our grasp, it would be impossible to fully satisfy our life's demands. So, no external accomplishment or achievement of acquisition of possessions, or no amount of safety, none of the comforts that we put between us and the scary world make for satisfaction or happiness or comfort in the end. They're never satisfying. We're never sated. We can never have enough of those things. And he wants to say that this is a very clear sort of lesson. Let me go on with his words, and then I'll say a little something more about it. This shows that our true life has quite different demands from those of which we know. It does not want the joy experienced by this individual self only. It desires joy from all around. Let's go back to these two lines. Even if the whole universe were within our grasp, it would be impossible to fully satisfy. This shows that our true life has quite different demands. I like this because it's not, in some ways we'd say, we're in a spiritual community and we're not just living in one, but we try to live spiritual lives and we accept certain values. And so among us, we might easily say, well, of course you're not going to be satisfied with material ends. It's ultimately a vacuous life and it will never be satisfying. And he's saying a version of that, but not quite that. Those things are ultimately not satisfying because they're transitory. They don't suffice. They don't fill us. They don't hold us. They don't keep us full. But ultimately, they're not satisfying because our desire is greater than the whole universe. Our desire is such that it can only be sated by something that is transcendent of all limitations. this particular stomach is so big, it cannot be filled by anything material. And so those things are unsatisfying because we want something that transcends them. And so it's not just about that the human being is just constantly seeking more and more comfort and gratification, but it actually has an inborn desire. We have an inborn desire that is so great that it could never be satisfied with such things. What I'm trying to say is that we usually put those things, the desire for those things, in the category of ego gratification. But he's switching it to say, no, it's the great self that is seeking something that could never be satisfied by those things. Of course, we grab for bigger and bigger and bigger and greater. Of course we do. That's our spiritual desire. It's just that we don't know that it's a spiritual desire. And so we're seeking to just accumulate more and more because that desire is so big. It's just that the desire is operational and we're not aware of its purpose. And we have to actually experience disappointment with these material ends in order to seek the one thing that does not disappoint. It does not want the joy experienced by this individual self only. It desires joy from all around. It does not wish for a momentary peace, but for one that is everlasting. It does not desire to love a beloved held in the arms of mortality. It needs a beloved to be always before it. It does not want to be loved only for today and perhaps not tomorrow. It wishes to float in the ocean of love. It is therefore that the Sufi seeks God as love, lover, and beloved, as treasure, possession, honor, joy, peace. And this attainment alone suffices. In its perfection, all demands of life for the here and the hereafter. How is it that God as treasure, possession, honor, joy, peace, love, lover, and beloved is satisfying to this desire? Why is God satisfying and nothing else?
Because it's the eternal and it's not transient. Transient is beyond and bigger than all material.
Can't be held. There's no putting your arms around it. So also the Ouroboros, the snake consuming its own tail. The desire leads us out and back into ourselves. And this desire is so big that it could swallow the universe. But even if it could swallow the universe, it would not be satisfied. It will only find satisfaction in being swallowed. God is the one thing, if we can say thing at all, that cannot be encompassed. There's no knowing God, so there's no satisfying the desire to know God. It's an endless longing. It creates endlessness in us, an experience of the endless. The eternal. Now, every being has a definite vocation, and this vocation is the light which illuminates one's life. Those who disregard their vocation are as lamps unlit. So we all have a definite vocation. And this vocation is the light which illuminates our lives. Those who disregard their vocation are as lamps unlit. So the vocation is there, it's before us. And apparently easily recognized. Joseph Campbell, very brilliant man, becomes very famous for saying, follow your bliss, a very simple sort of thing. But he wanted to say, what our vocation is not very far from us and not mysterious. It brings you joy. It's a light in your life. We're confused because we want to make a living out of it. But the vocation that's inborn in us and that is as a lamp is not actually very concerned about that. And this is a big part of our conflict. There's I don't like to be super critical about this, but there's kind of a mentality of sorts that comes out of talk shows, even things like Oprah, where maybe a person is invited on the show, and that person is held up as a kind of exemplar for, designing cute T-shirts for dogs, and because they so believed in making the cute T-shirts for dogs that had a little spiritual slogan on them, and they made $1 million, and you too can follow your bliss and make $1 million. And, there's an inherent flaw here. That you're all going to make $1 million from this, and it's already wrong motivation. God bless you if you like to make T-shirts for dogs with spiritual slogans on them. Do it for the love of it. But are you all going to make $1 million doing it? That's ridiculous. It's a confusion of vocation and success, or following your bliss and a kind of worldly success. The two don't necessarily go together at all. But what that bliss is not actually very far from us. We watch ourselves light up around the things that we love. We should be doing them as much as possible. But those things often demand sacrifices with which we're not comfortable. And in front of those sacrifices, we often will leave what our vocation is in order to pursue something else. And the sacrifice might be, I knew a person that very much wanted to be a horticulturalist, and had gone through, 4 years of school to study, and then found that the jobs that were available in that field did not pay very much. And then thought, maybe that's not what I want to do. But they actually loved it. But they also had competing desires about the kind of lifestyle they wanted to lead. And were not really willing to make the sacrifice for the love of the thing that they actually loved. And I'm not saying that's a bad decision. That's a valid decision. They also had another desire, these kind of comforts, to live a certain lifestyle. But in order to do the thing that gave them most joy, it required the sacrifice of that lifestyle, or at least potentially. Who knows what would have happened if they had followed it. So we can disregard our vocations. But he says that these are people who go about like lamps unlit. And why? It is mistrust that misleads. Sincerity leads straight to the goal. So very nice. Why do we not follow our vocation? Mistrust. Mistrust of what? Success. And let's change it a little bit. Lack of trust instead of mistrust. Lack of trust. Lack of trust misleads us. When we have a vocation, and that's the lamp before us, lack of trust, he says, according to Piramurshid here, that misleads us. And the implication is we should trust that lamp that lights up inside us. Trust it. Just go where the light is. You know? Look where there is light. Which leads to a ridiculous Mullah Nasruddin story. Which is off the point, but I'll tell it anyways. Where he's come home in the middle of the night, out with his friends, and gets to his door and finds that he doesn't have his key. And so he's searching all about, and he goes under a street lamp, and he's searching on his hands and knees looking for his keys. And somebody comes by, and this is Mullah Nasruddin, what are you doing? He says, I lost my keys. And the guy says, do you know where you lost them? You know, you're searching here. He says, no. Well, why are you searching here? He says, because there's light here.
That is actually very relevant.
Yeah, it is relevant. It's relevant to the spiritual path. And that's why they tell these stories, to turn the ideas on their ear.
Of course, there's light, and there's light.
Yep.
The light in the parable is the arrangements that make it an easier search, and not a challenging one.
Yep.
And there's a related issue of competing voices that say what's the valuable pursuit and what isn't.
Mm-hmm. And in this case, there's a lack of trust that this will work out. And he wants to get us into a different relationship. That where you have this kind of light, where you light up, you're going to find joy there. You are going to find joy there. You're going to have love there. It may not match up with all of your desires, but you will probably be on your best path. And the more you own it and trust in that, the more that will come from it. So it's mistrust that misleads, and why many of us go around as lamps unlit, because we've lacked trust in the thing that we know best. We know where our joy is. And if we don't trust that, what will we trust in life? Is there anything to trust in life when it's not, a priori knowledge that's right immediate to us? Can you trust anything if you don't trust that? And it's a setup for living a life of always being in doubt of your circumstances, of doubt if you're in the right place. And it is like walking around in the dark. When there is light, it's just, we've walked away from it. We know where the light is, but we walk away from it. And then we say, it's dark, it's dark. Now what leads one on the straight path? Sincerity. Those who, with sincerity, seek their real purpose in life are themselves sought by that purpose. As they concentrate on that search, a light begins to clear their confusion. Call it revelation, call it inspiration, Call it what you will. So there's lack of trust, which leads us to walk away from the light within us, which is very clear. Clear vocation towards something because we find joy in it. But he doesn't say that joy is the thing that drives you on the straight path to the success in life or success with your goal. He says it's sincerity. And I like to say something similar. You know, in some ways I've been blessed and had the misfortune of being at the center of the spiritual world for a number of years. You know, I was apprenticed and very closely apprenticed to a very famous spiritual teacher, and which put me on the inside of a lot of situations with many famous spiritual teachers, and put me right in the middle of a very disappointing situation with many famous spiritual teachers who did not live up to the endorsements on their books. Sincerity fills the gap for imperfect people. And that's what we are. We're imperfect practitioners, imperfect people, and all that counts is sincerity. That thing that just keeps reorienting you back to what your original ideals were, your intentions, sincerity. A sincere person can be forgiven for all their flaws, because at least they were sincere. And if there's a God that judges, it's sincerity that will save us. But here he says, sincerity leads straight to the goal. That there's no way to not accomplish your goal if you're sincere. Because the sincerity itself is the success. Whatever we think the goal might be, if we're truly sincere, it's already a measure of accomplishment of that goal. And in this volume, they've restored some of the question and answers with Pure Murshid. So someone asked the question after hearing this. In your answers, I find you give perfect freedom to every soul, and there seems to be no definite end. Is there any purpose for all this creation, or one at all? He says, there is a purpose over each purpose, and there is again a purpose under each purpose. Just think about that. Purposes within purposes. There are many layers of purpose in creation, overlapping purposes. Peter's purpose, my purpose, our purpose as a group here. What are we doing here tonight? We share, but we each have individual purposes. The purpose of the community in which we're held, the purpose of the Inayati lineage and a universalist Sufism and the message. You know, they're overlapping, they're enveloped. So there's a purpose over each purpose, and there's again a purpose under each purpose. And yet, beyond and beneath all purposes, there is no purpose. It is because it is. Now that's the deep stuff. Because we don't like that. Especially as spiritual practitioners, we don't like it. Because we like to say, oh, everything happens for a purpose. It all works out and it's all meaningful, you know, toward an end. But you know, when life hits us really hard, we can't even believe that. Especially when life is hitting us hard, we can't believe that. Because it's not true. And it is true. It's true and not true. And that's what we got. It is what it is. This is something I was talking about with a friend just the other day, that But from a psychological perspective, a Jungian psychological perspective, we know that that only sets up the opposite in shadow. When we emphasize God is good, we have to have the opposite in order to balance. So if our God is only good and everything is only meaningful, it's a setup for a tremendous disappointment. Because it's not taking full cognizance of the totality of being, which is as it is. It's all and everything and its opposite. There is meaning and there is meaninglessness. And we have to deal with that. Now, Moshe doesn't talk that way most of the time, but in this answer, he's given the truth. There is purpose, and there are purposes within purposes, and there are overarching grand purposes, and yet beyond and beneath all purposes, there is no purpose. It is because it is. And this leads us back to what he's saying. What is the purpose then? The successful attainment of life's demands. Living with life as it is. Learning to live with it as it is. In its profound disappointments, in its meaning, in its meaninglessness. Finding joy in it. Finding your own sense of purpose in it. Is there an ultimate purpose? Yes, no. But that's life. In Mexico, my family's Mexican-American. You'll hear people talk about la vida, in that Mexican pronunciation. Life. And when they say life, la vida, it's not the wine of life, the joy of life. No, whenever that is said, it's both. It means the beauty and the ugliness. It's all here and it's all rich. But it's rich. And that's what it is. And let's embrace it. You know? It's the mix of all of it. And if you don't embrace it, you're not really living. If you don't know pain, you don't know life. Nor do you know joy. Question. Then why should you tread the path of righteousness and piety? If there's no purpose, because that's the last thing this person heard. And it shook them probably. Because he ended with no purpose. No, he didn't actually end with no purpose. It is because it is. But this shook them probably. Then why should you tread the path of righteousness and piety if there's no purpose? And why do you spend your life in teaching and preaching to humanity? So he's putting it back to him. He says, because it's natural. Every loving and illuminated heart has a desire to see others partake of the vision of glory. Because it's natural. Every loving and illuminated heart has a desire to see others partake in its vision of glory. It is because it is. He knows where his vocation is. He knows where his light is. And he knows in participating in that light, out of it he has a joy in sharing it. And it's not more complicated than that. Where the joy is, where the light is, there's a desire to share more of that. Purpose or no purpose, that exists also. And it wants to give. Now in this section, it's an interesting section. And you have to listen to the first words he says in order to hear it properly. I will tell you how, this is called life in this world. So it's a follow-up on it is what it is. It is because it is. I will tell you how, under certain circumstances, I at least try to act. This is how I try to act. In all things, I see from the point of view of another, as well as from my own. And that's that classic statement that so many of us quote. A Sufi is one who sees things from two perspectives, their own and that of the other. So in all circumstances, I try to see from the point of view of another, as well as my own, at the same time, to hold both in the same moment, knowing that the truth is not mine, the truth is not theirs, the truth is something that exists between and around both of us. You know, how different would your life be if in your conflict with someone, and I'm not saying that you'll be out of the conflict, but if in your conflict with them, you realize, I have a perspective, and they have a perspective, and they're both just stories. Because my perspective is narrow. What I can see in this room is from about here to here, you know, even with the best of my peripheral vision, and I don't know what's behind me. I know what I think is behind me from what I saw before, but I don't really know. And you're looking this way. Neither one is the truth. The truth is something we cannot contain. It's bigger than us. And this is why the God we can't put our arms around is also called Al-Haq, the truth. The truth is bigger. What we have are stories. There's stories we believe in, and they have truth to them, because I can't deny to myself that I'm looking at Victoria, you know. But it's my story. And in our conflicts, we have a story, and the other person has a story. And if we both knew that they were just stories, there'd be a lot more room in the conflict for resolution. But if we believe that our stories are the truth, capital T, Haq, capital H, nothing's going to happen. They are not the truth. But to hold 2 points of view at once, something different might happen. I therefore give freedom of thought to everybody. Since I take it for myself. I give freedom of thought to everybody because I want it for myself, we might say.
There are a lot of people who want it for themselves and don't give it to everybody.
Right. And this is a trouble for us. And this is a trouble in a current circumstance, you know, that I like to point out around Islam and radical Islam. And many of us are guilty of saying this. We'll point to ISIS or, you know, some faction within, you know, radical Islam and say, that's not Islam. Well, we can't say that. That's not true. That is Islam. It's an ugly Islam. It's an Islam that we would not like to see. It's an Islam that we might think is an abuse of the Quran, but we can't say it's not Islam.
What does it mean then to say that it's Islam if it includes the possibility to be an abuse of the Quran?
Well, I might put it this way. Can I tell you you're not Jewish?
Well, I may neglect Torah if I don't abuse it.
In doing that, we're guilty of the very same crime of which we accuse them. They can call themselves what they want. They have a right. Because I want freedom of thought for myself, I grant it to everybody else. Radical fundamentalists are always telling somebody else that they are invalid, that they are not true Muslims, they are not true Christians, they are not true Jews. And anybody that sets themselves up as that authority is just asking to be invalidated themselves. Who has the authority to invalidate somebody else? You can call yourself what you want. We give that freedom to one another. We just say, we disagree with the methodology. We say, that is not appropriate behavior. But I can't tell you what your name is. If you want, and many of us in this room have a whole host of strange names that maybe even our family doesn't want to call us and wants to tell us, no, you're not that. And we want to insist, no, that's who I actually am. And who gets to tell us that we're not? So if we deny them the right to call themselves that, they can just as easily deny us the right. Better to actually say, that's bad behavior.
That's what I was going to ask. Then we can say, you could say, I'm a bad Jew.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, you can say that for yourself.
Right.
But I don't get to say that for you.
Well, I'm pointing the distinction between saying I'm not a Jew and saying I'm a bad Jew.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. So again, I'd go back to say, yeah, we might feel that's a particularly ugly version of the religion. But we'll not say they're not. I mean, we can, but it's to this point. I therefore give freedom of thought to everybody, since I take it for myself. What I want for myself, I want for others. It's an ideal, not that we live up to it. And again, he says, I at least try to act this way. And I think he was more successful than most, given his accomplishments. I appreciate what is good in another and overlook what I consider bad. No, it's not always so easy to do, and can't always be true. He's talking about an ideal of behavior, especially with the people that you're generally associating with. There's nobody that you're going to be in relationship with, especially if you're in relationship with them, that you're not going to see the flaws. But if we want to stay in relationship with them, we have to decide, if it's a pretty good relationship, there are things I'm just going to overlook. Not that I want them happening all the time, but you have to decide what's important. Pick your battles. What's important? On the other hand, we're faced with situations where it's impossible to overlook what is bad, because there's a demand to act in a way that says, no, I protest. This is wrong. So I think he's not speaking for all situations here. This is not about being passive amidst injustice, because this is the same person who told his children, if someone invades your land and brings war to your people, you have to fight. You have to fight. You have to take care of those who need care. So we have to balance the total understanding with statements like this. These are in general circumstances. If anyone behaves selfishly to me, one may take it naturally, as it is human nature to be selfish, and I'm not disappointed with it. Yeah. We act as if selfishness is unnatural. No, it's the most natural thing. You can expect it. Things you can expect, you can make more allowance around. People are going to be selfish. You can be profoundly grateful, however, when they're not. And that's different. But that they're going to be selfish? Sure. I mean, look at children. They're not angels. You expect that. But then you try to bring them up differently and say, Now look at the consequences of this selfishness. But the selfishness itself is natural. The first thing that we know maybe is that my belly is empty. I want. It's an elevated value to say, I want more for you to be happy in this circumstance and to yield something to somebody else. And that's why we think of love and unselfish love as divine. Because we're willing to give something to somebody else that we would ordinarily hold for ourselves. But when I appear myself to be selfish, I take myself to task and try to improve. Selfishness in others, I need to forgive. Selfishness in myself, I need to look at it and do something about it. So the spiritual path, as we pointed out in other sessions, is so much about personal responsibility. And in the last, I think it was last week when we were looking at initiation, personal responsibility was a characteristic he put out there of somebody who was ready for initiation. When they started to take more responsibility for themselves and to blame other people less, you're ready for initiation. You've stepped on the path. That personal responsibility is a characteristic of the path. Taking oneself to task, looking at the mote in my eye before the beam in yours. There is not anything that I am not ready to tolerate, and there is nobody whom I would not forgive. Again, I think we need to qualify that one. There are intolerable things that we should not tolerate, things that we should not turn a blind eye to. I don't think that that's what he's talking about. I think he's saying there's not anything that happens in life that I don't accept as something that happens in life. Terrible, ugly things. I accept that they're part of this totality. I don't think he's talking about tolerating abusive behavior or, a tyrant or things that shouldn't happen that way. I think he's talking about, I accept that all of this happens. There's a certain kind of idealism, and I have this kind of idealism, that almost makes me want to opt out of life sometimes. And seeing remarkably ugly things, and I have no place for them inside. And I want to say it should not be. And it takes me to the point of almost wanting to pull back out of life. And he's wanting to say there's a kind of maturity to not opting out in those circumstances. Accept. It happens. It's all present here. Just because there's that much ugliness doesn't mean there isn't that much beauty on the other side. But accept it all. Otherwise, you're not with the living. You're not in the middle of life, and you're going to cease to contribute to the majesty of this grand thing with all its beauty and ugliness. He says he accepts it. And maybe the only reason that carries any weight with me is because I know that Hazrat Inayat Khan suffered great losses. How many times was he married? And did he lose 2, 3 wives before he came into the West? To illness or childbirth or different things, whatever it might have been. This is a person who knew loss. And I think that I respect. Platitudes about what you should believe or not, coming from somebody I don't know who's suffered, maybe that wouldn't mean so much. So I think it means more here, and I think he's talking about accepting the pain of life. I'm ready to tolerate it. And there's nobody whom I would not forgive. And I think this is difficult for many people, but I don't think it's as impossible as thinking you need to tolerate every situation. There's nobody who I would not forgive. This works for us when we realize that forgiveness is not about the other person. Forgiveness is something we do for ourselves, knowing that resentment and hatred just tend to burn us up. Forgiveness is a kind of freedom. Also, it's a willingness to know deeper than the surface. You take the worst villain in history, age them backward to the time when they're just a baby, and then that baby is handed to you. Don't they deserve every amount of love that every bit of love that you could give them? That person was a child, that person was shaped by circumstances, So it just a small amount of deeper thought can find the place that can maybe not forgive the action, but can forgive the person. The action may be intolerable. The person is deserving of love. The person is not necessarily the persona that you see either. That's the mask. We acquire masks over time. They're accretions. But is that the person? That's a question. It's what we were looking at on Tuesday with Al-Ghazali. That there are layers of personhood. There are layers of persona over the person, the archetype of this being in all of its potential and what it could be. How it manifested and how it was shaped and limited is another thing. Those whom I trust, I never doubt. Whom I love, I never hate. It says, when you're in your love, you're not hating. It doesn't exist. Whom I once raised in my estimation, I never cast down. They still exist in that estimation. I saw the best in them. That best exists. Maybe you saw the worst too, but it didn't mean the best didn't exist. Did they live up to it? That may be a different thing. I wish to make friends with everybody I meet. If I find them difficult, and this is good advice, I make an effort to gain their friendship. If I cannot succeed in my effort, then I become indifferent. I try not to have my buttons pushed by them. When once I make a friend, I never wish to break the friendship. If anybody causes me harm in any way, I think that it's probably because I deserve it, or that the one who harms me knows no better. Now again, I go back to the beginning. He's talking about a successful attitude, not necessarily about the truth, about a way of trying to live. Like, one of the few powers that we really have in life, when it comes down to it, is the ability to choose what our attitude is going to be to the things that show up in front of us. We don't get to choose, most of the time, what things show up in front of us. So that leaves us with kind of 1 inch of power, and it's about attitude. What attitude will I take to this moment? Oh, everything's against me, it's so horrible, and then I'm already defeated. I like to say, I use this phrase all the time, I belong in this moment. Whatever it is, I belong in this moment. Somehow, it's not unnatural for me to be in it, so there must be something to do. Must be something I can contribute to it. I belong in this moment. And that's my attitude for getting through the difficult places. But that's our power. The power to choose how we're going to meet the moment. I have no enemies, but every soul that raises its head in life gets much opposition from the world. That's not to say that there are no enemies. He's saying his attitude is that they are not enemies of his. But he certainly had enemies. It has been so with all the prophets, saints, and sages, and that is why I cannot expect to be exempt. Under such circumstances, I see in it the fact that forces of opposition rise up, a law of nature, and also God's plan working and preparing something desirable. Somebody once asked me for a definition of the spiritual path, and I said, challenge to growth. Things that rise up, and you take an attitude that meets them, and it creates growth in you. It's a principle of the universe. I mean, a horse that foals, gives birth to another horse, a baby horse, and that mother doesn't lift the baby horse up, because she knows that if it doesn't get its legs under it itself, it won't have the strength to survive. Through that effort to get itself up, it will show whether it has the strength to survive, and it will gain that strength. That there are forces of gravity that work against us that keep our bodies strong. Bone density is developed by jumping up and down and from gravity, and for we know to do exercises now that have some impact to create stronger bones, because it's a response. It's the same in developing anything strong on the spiritual path. Where everybody's meditating on a cloud, and it's always this beautiful, serene atmosphere, and that's what spirituality is. But I think anybody that's actually on the spiritual path knows that there's a grit to it. And a difficult challenge, and often past a stage where everything seems very beautiful and you take initiation and then you hit a wall and you go, where did that come from? So anybody that's on the path knows that a new level of challenge rises up to meet you and challenges you to grow beyond the stage that you're currently at. And without that challenge, you don't acquire the muscle necessary to go higher, deeper, however you want to phrase it. So he considers that opposition is a law of nature and part of God's plan for preparing something that's actually desirable. I consider no one as either higher or lower than I am. I see in all sources that suffice my need of life. One source, God, the only source. And in admiring and in bowing before and in loving anyone, I consider I am doing it to God. In sorrow I look to God, and in joy I thank God. In sorrow I look to God, and in joy I thank God. In the people before me, in the obstacles before me, I consider that I'm in relationship with God with those things. In sorrow I look to God, in joy I thank God. This is something I've had to think a lot about in the last couple of years. And right now it reminds me of a Hasidic saying, actually a little anecdote, where a Hasidic master asked himself this question, He said, for so much of my life, I've been so God-connected. I've felt where the connection is. There's a joy. I know I'm connected. I'm doing the work, and I'm in the flow. And then it stops. And there's an emptiness. And I can't feel my connection to God. So where is my connection then? Where is God then when I can't feel God? I'm out of connection. I'm out of contact. And he's speaking these words as a kind of meditation. And then it occurred to him, God is in the longing. God is not actually absent, but God is then present in the longing to be connected to God in the absence of the feeling connected. God is in the longing. And maybe that's what in time reestablishes the feeling of connection. The awareness in that longing that we need something. Something that connects us, something that brings us back into connection. Maybe the absence of God in that period where it feels like absence, rather, becomes like a magnetic force that pulls us toward others, pulls us toward a deeper relationship with one another. And is not that a reestablishment of the God connection? So in sorrow, I look to God. And you can feel the separation. I look to God. It's like reaching out, look to. And in joy, I thank God. And that's feeling God's presence. But in both, God is the common denominator. So it's very much like that Hasidic saying. I do not bemoan the past, and I do not worry about the future, but try to make the best of today. And this is a challenge. You know, Buddhism puts it in a very simple way. It says, there's no past and there's no future. The past is memory and the future is fantasy. So there's only this moment. But it's actually very difficult. Many of us here are Sufis, and we've chosen Sufism because of its orientation to love and invoking love's transformative power. But it's a dangerous power. It's passionate. It takes us into deep places of loss and pain and joy and connection. We've chosen a path that looks longingly on love and will take us into relationships with one another where maybe we can't be with one another so easily. And so there's a lot of fear about the future not working out or something like that. And then it becomes a transformative challenge to exist with that desire for the future and for it to work out a certain way, and to come back to this moment and say, is that where I need to operate from? That fear of things not working out. Can I just be present and give my love in this moment? And so he doesn't bemoan the past and he doesn't worry about the future. He tries to make the best of today. Live here. If you've got love to give, give it. You've got a purpose, act it out now. Don't worry about whether you'll be able to do it tomorrow. Today, maybe even this minute, maybe even for 5 seconds, I can act on it. I don't need to worry about it 5 minutes from now, whether I'll be able to act on it. Act on it now. I know no failure. He knows no failure because he's acting on it now. In sincerity. Even in a fall, I see a stepping stone to rise. And yet to me, the rise and the fall in life matters but little. I do not repent of what I have done, and I think, say, and do what I mean. I do not repent of what I've done. Again, I think this is a statement of acceptance. I don't think it's about not feeling bad about things that have happened, especially if you've hurt someone. That pain is transformative. You hold that. But I think it's accepting, I was where I was. I did what I did. I'm not going to live in that past. I think that's a different matter. I think, say, and do what I mean. Again, sincerity. And again, to quote the book of James, as I'm always quoting, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Be really clear in what you do. There's not much to regret if you're saying what you actually mean. If you love someone, tell them. They may not be here tomorrow. There are fewer regrets when you just tell the truth, If I wish to accomplish anything in life, I do not fear consequences. I simply go and do it and hold what will be, will be. And I think that's really important. If you want to accomplish anything, do not fear the consequences. And I don't think that means go headlong into the future without considering the consequences. I don't think he's saying that at all. But it's a completely different decision to say, I'm going to go to this protest, and I know it's a dangerous situation, and there'll be police and whatever, and I'm going to go do it, and it's going to be fine. I don't fear the consequences. It's a completely different thing to say, I'm going to go to this protest. I may get hurt. I own that. That's part of the decision. When you own all the possible consequences while making the decision, when making the decision, there's nothing to regret. And there's no place to go, oh, I didn't think of that. I didn't, and there's nobody else to blame. So taking full cognizance of the consequences before you make a decision is a holistic decision. It's a completely different sort of thing than going headlong. That's not what he's saying at all. I do not fear consequences. He owns the consequences, and he still goes and does it, saying, what will be, will be. But this is right. Take from these ideas what seems to you best, and forget the rest. He's just saying, this is what I try to do. Take from it what seems good to you. For how subtle he was, what a remarkably good teacher. And a remarkably good teacher is not just laying things out didactically for you. He's challenging the mind. He's making statements that are meant to trip you up so that you'll stop and actually think, consider, go deeper. A good teacher does that. Challenges you to reach for understanding yourself instead of just delivering answers to you. That never works. It goes in one ear and out the other. If the teaching is too smooth, it just runs right through us. It's got to gum up the works a little so that you stop and go try to pull the wrench out, and when you pull it out, you realize how everything operates. And it's really clear how often he's doing that, making us think, oh, is that love? He just used the word love, and he's saying, he's using it in this context, but it was clear he was talking about being wanted. It wasn't love at all. But because he's used the word, and then he's given us a definition that we go, that doesn't quite work. Then we reevaluate, and then we ask the question, well, what is actually love? So he's a remarkably good teacher, great teacher. And in approaching a text in this way, I do two different things because I was trained both in Hasidism and Sufism. And in the Hasidic tradition, You do a lot of textual commentary, and you're in relationship with a text, as if you're in relationship with that teacher. And you have two minds. One mind is a critical mind, challenging everything that's said. And that's just good for the mind to do, to not just accept. On the other hand, if you're only doing that, then you're not available to learn something either, you know. And so the second mind we take is what we call the right-making mind. How is this right? So the first question I ask is there something wrong with that? You know, how does that strike me? And the other question I ask is, how can this be right? And between those two, in that dialectic, I find a synthesis. And I like to take this approach, even with Murshid, though, you know, in many ways he wanted people to actually take the right-making mind and just listen. But I think as we get out of the period when these were presented, because every teaching is presented in a cultural context, that has a certain kind of language and has certain kind of assumptions, more and more we have to do a little more challenge so that we understand, oh, it did come in a context. Now, how would he have said that today? If he was speaking to a different group of people. Not to criticize, but just to say, oh, how can we understand that? Because some of the things are not translating so well anymore, because he was speaking to a different group of people. But I believe that the teachings are so solid that with just a little challenge here and there, and then mixing that with the right-making mind, I think we find that these teachings will go on for generations and generations.